Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about these two novels I've been reading, which are The Reader by Bernard Schlink and Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. We are going to be diving into how both of these authors use characterization to portray reductionism and its role in lessening empathy throughout society. We're going to be looking at how they portray reductionism, shed light on systemic circumstances which perpetuate harmful behavior, and ultimately combat reductionism to promote empathy in their novels. And, in the end, I'm going to be deciding who I think did it better. But before we get into all that, some of you may be wondering, what is reductionism? What is empathy? And that, my friends, is what we are going to start with. Do you think that we should empathize with criminals? If not, I hope that I'll be able to change your mind. To start, we need to discuss empathy. What is empathy? The base definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Although basic enough, we have come to a point in society where many have come to associate empathy with knowing exactly what a person is feeling and being able to directly relate to their circumstances. While somewhat valid, this misconception takes away from the broader and more inclusive value of empathy. Empathy does not mean I know exactly how you feel, but it is much more like I see your pain, I recognize its weight, and I care about it. Ideally, we should all be able to feel empathy for one another, empathizing with at the very least basic human experiences such as pain, hardship, and struggle, or things like mistakes, failure, or regret. Remember that empathizing is also understanding. By choosing to empathize with someone, you are opening yourself up to understanding the complexities of what makes them who they are. And with that being said, what makes a person? What makes you, you? Is it your actions, your words? Is it your name or face? Your emotions, your relationships with others, your hopes and dreams, your conscience? No, it's not any one of those things. It's all of them and more that build the mosaic that one may call their own life. Now, it would be wrong to say that we are defined by only one of those things, right? Well, let me introduce you to reductionism and dehumanization. They kind of go hand in hand. This dastardly duo are undoubtedly two of the biggest obstacles to empathy throughout society. In the context of dehumanization, reductionism refers to simplifying people to one aspect of their identity, most commonly, their actions. It has become ever so common for people to reduce others down to nothing but their negative actions. Criminals, for example. Pause and think for a second about the negative connotations that come with that word. When you hear that someone is a criminal or you label them as such, it is so easy to reduce them in your mind to nothing but the negative actions that cause them to be a criminal. This reductionism leaves no room for empathy or understanding. By reducing them just to this one action, we are ignoring their identity, their positive deeds, their emotions, and again, the circumstances that shape them into becoming people who would perpetrate such terrible acts to begin with. This tendency to dehumanize extends far beyond just criminals. It has become disturbingly easy to reduce people we don't know and not recognize their humanity. Just think about historical figures who have caused immeasurable amounts of suffering, the millions of victims who have all been reduced down to mere statistics, or even that deranged guy you saw on the subway that one time. It is so easy and convenient to not see those people as human beings, with identities and stories, to not even try to understand the circumstances that shape those lives. Nobody is born good or evil. We are all shaped by our environments, experiences, and choices. Yet when it comes to criminals, we've become far too comfortable labeling them as monsters, as if that absolves us from understanding them, as if that allows us to ignore the systems and circumstances that perpetuate harm to begin with. The uncomfortable truth remains, which is that those who do terrible things are still human. It is only by choosing to understand one another that we can truly begin to identify and break these cycles. At the end of the day, empathy is not and never will be a can or cannot. Empathy is now and always will be a choice. Welcome back. I hope I've been able to deepen your understanding, and I hope I was able to change your mind. But moving forward, let's talk about these two novels. The Reader tells the story of Michael Berg, a teenager who has an affair with a woman named Hannah Schmidt. Hannah disappears suddenly, leaving Michael heartbroken, but years later, as a law student, he learns that she is a defendant accused of Nazi war crimes. He learns that she is illiterate, and despite the horrific actions she had taken part in, Michael struggles with his complex feelings toward her. This novel explores the topics of love, guilt, shame, and moral responsibility, as well as a generational struggle to confront and move forward from Germany's past. On the other hand, Purple Hibiscus takes place in post-colonial Nigeria during a time of political unrest and tells the story of 15-year-old Cambilia Chike. Cambilia lives in a strict and oppressive household dominated by her devoutly religious father, Eugene, who is a respected figure in the community but an abusive authoritarian at home. Throughout the story, Cambilia spends time with her more liberal aunt Iphioma and her children. In this freer environment, Cambilia begins to discover her voice, experience love, and question her father's beliefs and control. The novel explores topics of family, religion, freedom, and political instability, while highlighting the transformative power of love and self-discovery. Alright, now with that out of the way, we can begin with... So to begin, we are going to be looking at how these two authors portray and represent reductionism, specifically through the use of characterization. We are going to start with a passage from the Reader, in which Schlink uses repetition and juxtaposition to truly emphasize the opposing ideas of understanding and condemning. This internal conflict characterizes Michael in a way to reveal how difficult it can be to judge a crime while also being empathetic towards the person behind it. Michael's personal connection to Hannah forces him to see her as more than just her crimes, but even so, he still struggles to empathize with her. Us as the reader do not share that connection, and so it is much easier for us to condemn Hannah for her terrible deeds as we don't personally know her and thus don't have much of a reason to want to empathize with her. This highlights just how easily reductionism can take hold when we don't have any connection to the person we are dehumanizing. Michael's struggle shows us that it is possible to want to empathize with someone while still holding them accountable, pointing out the tendency throughout society for us to choose only to condemn while inviting us to reflect on how we reduce and judge others in our own lives. Next up is a passage from Purple Hibiscus, in which Adichie uses tea as a symbol for Eugene's love, with the painful love sips representing how his love came alongside abuse. Cambilia's distraught reaction characterizes her, displaying her conflicting emotions toward her father. She struggles with being caught between her love for her father and the trauma of his abuse, resulting in her being unable to fully love or hate him. While Cambilia's perspective is shaped by personal experience, us as readers are positioned differently. It's far easier for us to see Papa solely as an abusive oppressor, as we don't have that same connection to him. It is much more convenient for us to dismiss his love as a form of self-justification and to in turn reduce him down to his worst traits. Although Papa's love doesn't excuse his actions, it's still a part of his identity. Ignoring this complexity is not right, as in doing so we neglect to see the circumstances that shaped him and the good he has done despite his oppressive behavior, which I will get to later. Comparing these two, we can clearly see that both authors use the characterization and relationships of their protagonists to portray reductionism and invite us, the readers, to reflect. Schlink provides a more direct commentary on reductionism and its almost paradoxical relationship with empathy. On the other hand, Adichie does not directly touch on empathy or reductionism, but more so relies on the reader to make their own conclusions. For this reason, it's clear that Schlink gives a better portrayal of reductionism in the sole sense that it is more openly discussed and brought to question. So, 1 point to the reader. Moving forward, we have... Next, we're going to be looking at how the authors portray the circumstances that affected these characters, and how they invite us, the reader, to empathize with the factors that played a role in shaping them. So, with that in mind, we shall commence with another passage from the Reader, in which Schlink uses a stream of consciousness to reveal Hannah's uncertainty about becoming a Nazi prison guard at Siemens. This moment of vulnerability shows us that she never questioned the morality of her actions, despite being responsible for the deaths of countless Jewish people. This makes it clear that external factors such as Nazi propaganda, societal pressures, and Hannah's literacy, which we'll get to later, shaped her actions and played a role in her moral failure. This frames her as both a perpetrator of horrific crimes, but also a victim of her own circumstances. Again, this is not to absolve Hannah of her crimes or to lessen their severity, rather to show us how ordinary people, influenced by their environment, can become complicit in extraordinary evils. By reducing and dehumanizing Hannah, we lose the ability to understand her circumstances and the systemic issues in place at the time, which played a role as well. Alright, now let's revisit Purple Hibiscus with another quote in which Adichie uses a metaphor to liken Papa's irrational behavior to delirium from a severe illness, framing his religious extremism and oppression as symptoms of deeper systemic damage. This comparison suggests his actions are shaped less by malice and more by the cultural and psychological scars of colonialism, namely from his missionary school upbringing, bringing to light the ways post-independence Nigeria continued to be weighed down by the effects of colonialism. Auntie Ifeoma's empathetic and understanding perspective toward Papa characterizes her and displays how she is able to hold him accountable while simultaneously recognizing that Papa was not just a product of his personal choices, but of systemic colonial forces that shaped his identity. It is this balance of condemning actions while still being open to understanding the person behind them, which is crucial. Dehumanizing others blocks empathy and obscures our understanding of systemic roots of harm. Through this, Adichie highlights the societal conditions that perpetuate harm while emphasizing the need for empathy and understanding in addressing them. Comparing the two, it is clear that both authors use contextualization to combat reductionism by allowing us to see the external factors that shape these characters while still holding them accountable for their actions. These texts differ in how they portray external influences on their characters and encourage empathy. Medici explicitly shows that Papa is a product of colonialism, with Auntie Fioma being empathetic toward him, encouraging readers to do the same. In contrast, Schlink doesn't directly link Nazi ideology or societal pressures to Hannah's actions, leaving it up to the reader to make that connection for themselves. Along with that, no character in that scene blatantly shows Hannah empathy in the same way Auntie Ifioma does for Papa. For this reason, Purple Hibiscus wins this round 1-1. Now, lastly, we have... Finally, we're going to be discussing how each of these authors fight against the reductionism and dehumanization of their characters and promote greater empathy in us, the readers. Starting with our last quote from the reader, Schlink uses repetition of the words, "that was why," to further emphasize the impact of Hannah's literacy on her actions, not to justify them, but to help readers understand her motives and the complexity of her identity. Hannah is characterized not just as a perpetrator, but as a victim of her own circumstances and flaws, with her illiteracy shaping her life in very profound ways. By making illiteracy a central part of Hannah's character, Schlink encourages us not to reduce her down to the worst of her actions, but rather to understand her as a person, ensuring that in our minds, Hannah is not remembered as a monster, but rather as flawed, complicit, and even inconsiderate, but still undeniably human. Moving on with our last quote from Purple Hibiscus, Medici uses Papa's anonymous donations as a symbol to show his attempt to separate his public persona from his private actions. The anonymity of his donations suggests that his good deeds were not for selfish gain, but were in fact genuine acts of compassion, adding complexity to his character without justifying his abuse. These acts force us, the reader, to recognize that Papa is not fully good or evil, challenging moral binaries and inviting us to empathize with and understand Papa as a person, which ultimately combats reductionism and dehumanization as a result. Comparing the two, it is clear that both combat reductionism and dehumanization without justifying the character's actions, offering different ways to explore their complexities and inviting empathy from us, the reader. These two differ in how they contextualize their characters' complexities. Schlink focuses on Hannah's literacy to explain her actions, offering a clearer path to empathy by revealing her flaws, mistakes, and circumstances. Medici, on the other hand, highlights the contradictions in Papa's behavior without fully explaining his actions, challenging reductionism but leaving less room for empathy. So in my mind, I would say Schlink does it better by fostering a deeper understanding of his character and leaving more room for empathy. And so with that, the reader wins 2-1. So yeah, in conclusion, even though both authors accurately portray reductionism's role in lessening empathy throughout society, as well as illustrating the need to reject reductionism and promote empathy, I believe that Schlink does an arguably better job than Adichie. Outside of that though, the moral of the story is, or at least what I'd like you, the viewer, to take away from this, is that society has become far too judgmental, especially when it comes to people we don't know. Labels like criminal, victim, immigrant, or even elderly come with assumptions that make it easy to dismiss the humanity behind them. It is far too easy and convenient to have these connotations and predisposed assumptions that come with these labels and to never care enough to push past them. Again, I say that empathy is not a matter of whether you can or cannot. Empathy will always be a choice. It's about caring enough to see others as human, even when it's difficult, and especially when we don't want to. Refusing to do so just perpetuates the dehumanization that prevents us from addressing these deep-rooted systemic issues that are all around us. And while I don't expect you to go out of your way to try and understand every single person you meet or hear about, it's unrealistic to empathize with everybody. But if we can at the very least acknowledge the humanity in other people, the next time you see a criminal on the news, to just recognize that there is more to that person's identity and story, to just notice the times where you find yourself reducing other people, even if it's subconsciously, to call yourself out on it and to try to be better. If you were just able to see the humanity in one more person than you normally would have, then it would have been worth it for me. Thank you for listening.